A website is never finished, especially a B2B tech website. Welcome to ForwardSlash, the podcast that explores how B2B tech companies can leverage their websites to achieve fast, efficient, predictable, and scalable growth. In each episode, I take a big issue affecting the B2B tech landscape and then pick the brains of marketing leaders around the world to learn how the issue affects the questions B2B tech marketers should be asking about their websites and how to answer them. Let's get into it.
Camille, Trent, Director of Content and Community at PeerSignal, previously Head of Content at Dooley, and quite an established leader in the B2B SaaS marketing community. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam.
Totally. I'm really excited for this. I'm a big fan of yours. I love the content you've been publishing on LinkedIn, especially in your new role at PeerSignal, about all the cool stuff that you guys are doing and accomplishing. So I think that's probably the best place to start. If you don't mind telling me about PeerSignal, what it does, and your role there.
Yeah. So I've been at PeerSignal for now just about a month. And so we, unlike most SaaS companies, kind of started in reverse in a lot of ways. So the quick backstory is that Adam, one of the co-founders, this is his fourth venture now. So he's done this a few times. He's made a few SaaS products, and essentially how this one started, it was as like a passion project. So him and technical co-founder Andrew, they worked on this data set to essentially kind of just track B2B SaaS, track trends in marketing, trends in sales, like really wanted to just understand like how to go to market, both for themselves. They kind of knew that they wanted to build a SaaS product together. They didn't know exactly what that would look like or what they wanted to build. But instead just kind of listen to the market and what they wanted. So yeah, essentially PeerSignal was the first stage, and it's really a research and media property. And it's manifest in a few different databases. So curated databases where you can learn about the PLG model, where you can learn about just general B2B, hiring trends, and learn a lot just from our databases. Then we started adding curated galleries. So B2B pricing pages, home pages. So you can essentially benchmark GTM, see what other companies are doing more easily. So it's really just this resource for people like us, right? So B2B SaaS nerds, essentially, to just geek out on different GTM strategies. So that's how it started. And then as they were going down this road, started just a couple months ago, like expanding the team, wanting PeerSignal to remain separate from the eventual SaaS product. So we've been building a SaaS product kind of in stealth based on some of the insights from PeerSignal. So naturally, some people kind of started coming inbound and were like, hey, can you help us identify and like target our correct like ICP? Like you have all this data, and I'm kind of like trying to curate it, to use it in our go-to-market approach, whether it's more, ABM or more like a sales or a blend of that. We're kind of already starting to use our free resource that way. And so started getting some inbound inquiries about just a more consultative product, I suppose. And so from there, like we had a few design partners, so paying customers that came in, but still haven't officially launched that product. So it's really kind of unique. And I think by the time this episode comes out, that product will be live and launched. So it'll be interesting to watch that happen. But going back to me and my role, I'm Director of Content and Community at PeerSignal. So that'll continue to be my primary focus, is keeping up our media and research arm and making sure we're producing, top tier go-to-market insights and data, and curating those in the way that our target customers or not even customers, our target audience like really wants to see them. Like we want this to be an evergreen, go-to resource for sales and marketing leaders. So that's essentially my role, and then more of a advisor role on the SaaS product.
Gotcha. I love what you guys are doing, and we're going to dive into all the data that you're collecting at PeerSignal, and what you're seeing specifically in the B2B SaaS side. But I'd first like to take a step back and kind of get your thoughts on the overarching reality of the B2B SaaS market today, how buyers are entering the market, the implications it has for us as marketers working in this space. This whole idea of the dark funnel and dark social, whatever you want to call it, buyers are basically walking themselves through their own journey, right? And as a leader in both community and content, you bring a very interesting perspective to the table. So I'm curious what you think this reality means for B2B SaaS marketers.
I think I'd start with the fact that buyers have the power now, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. And that doesn't have to be something that doesn't have to be a negative, like for tech companies. The best tech companies are just embracing that. So I'll kind of start there, but it's funny. Adam and I had been talking about this like all day, pretty much all week, about this concept. So if you're just going after the 3% that are in market right now, you're leaving a lot on the table. So the companies that are focusing, 90%, let's say, of their go-to-market efforts on trying to capture people or force people like into a buying journey versus trying to educate and inspire and just create like good content that's around your category and trying to own and educate on the category. Now you're able to capture, parts of that other 97%, right? When you take that, that bigger approach, and like now you can own, or at least you have the opportunity to own more of that market share. So communication, the fact that social media exists, you can have global peers, right? Like you can, especially with remote work, you probably have peers all over the country that you're working on, maybe all over the world. So, and then on top of that, add in LinkedIn, add in some of these other social networks, and you can connect with other B2B marketers all over the place, and you can crowdsource insights about different tech, right? And so you can really be like, hey, I'm thinking about buying this technology. What do you guys think, right? And you can get like that feedback from existing customers, from other people evaluating that customers. It's all real time. So I think like that's really changed the dynamic. And even before that, like the rise of search. So you can more easily look up reviews, look up research on a product, and then you also have PLG, right? So you have these companies that are prioritizing the way that customers want to experience a product, the way that they want to like interact as buyers or users, and just different ways that you can like try before you buy. So there's like the freemium model where you can get into the product and use all or a small portion of the features before you buy. There's also things like interactive tours, that you're seeing more and more vendors put on their website, so just to give people a sense of what they do, video tours. So you have all those things like combined, and like you have a much better understanding of like what you're getting yourself into based on feedback from peers, based on your interactions with that product. And so you're really not like going into it blind. And we're seeing more like month-to-month pricing, right? Or even like the concept of like visible pricing in B2B is still pretty new. So all of those things combined, like tell me that it's a buyer's market. And more so PLG companies, like we did some research recently and found that 2/3 of the 2022 Cloud 100 are PLG companies. So what that tells us is the companies that are embracing this, that are embracing the user experience, the way that people want to buy, those are the companies that are winning.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like, I feel like we kind of inherently understand that as marketers, but for whatever reason, we've just like painted ourselves into a corner, right? Because technology and all of its power and capability, it's given us this narrow focus on just kind of like hacking away at that 3%, right? And it just kind of like begs the question, what are we doing about the rest of the 97%? And that's kind of like, that's the other half of what you're doing at PeerSignal, right? That's the kind of community aspect of it. So I'm curious on your thoughts there as far as like today for B2B SaaS, what's more important? Is it the community side, whether that's an owned community that you're building within, let's say Slack or something, or whether it's like employee advocacy on LinkedIn, or is it the website? Between the two, and I know you're new to PeerSignal, so I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot here, but I'm curious how you're thinking about balancing the two, because it sounds like they're both pretty important.
Yeah, no, that is a good question. So we've really gone the way of let's engage an audience, right? Let's like open a discussion about go to market, right? About like what's working, what's not working, what the best companies are doing well. Like we've essentially just been tracking the B2B SaaS market like through our databases and then through our research. So every time we publish a newsletter once a week, right? And so that forces us to go into the data and analyze it, right? And then see the story within there. And then that also like positions us as thought leaders, like around go to market. And then, it's Adam and I that are working the most closely on this part of the business. And coincidentally, like we're both go to market leaders, right? Like have been in like the B2B SaaS like marketing world and have those connections and conversations like that you'd need to kind of like add to the quantitative research. So that has been like the primary advantage. And then I think there's the distribution side is, like the newsletter. Some of the things that we look at are open rates, but also replies, like engagement. And then we link those things together, like what's happening on social, because we will reformat the research that we do in typically like a slide or carousel like type version, because we know that that's like the best fit for that channel. And then we try other things like screen captures and long form posts and just get a sense of like, what format and packaging that people want to see on that platform, and then what's sparking the right conversations with the right folks, right? So if we're aiming to speak at like the VP sales and marketing level, we'll know if that's working if VPs of sales and marketing like are replying to it and having quality comments and things too, right? So there's that. And then there's like the fact that both of them are linked, right? Where when we send out a newsletter, we link back to that post. And in our post kind of a teaser posts, I suppose, like those will, encourage people to sign up for the newsletter or tease, what we're going to introduce in the newsletter or what we did in that newsletter. So that's essentially kind of been phase one for us, has been nailing that. And now kind of at the point where it's standardizing the process of that, making it more efficient so we can eventually add other channels and things. But then thinking about turning audience like more into community, we think that we've built like a little bit of a borrowed community, I guess, in a way, where it's, it mostly lives on LinkedIn or,
right.
Through email. And it still skews a little bit more one to many kind of like conversation or a one-way conversation rather than like a two-way conversation. So we want to move to it being even more of a two-way conversation.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's an interesting point. And I just recently read something that kind of perked my ears a little bit, specifically with LinkedIn. the statistic I read was branded content is only competing for like 20% of impressions on LinkedIn. And I think it's kind of similar to on other platforms, whereas personal branded content opens it up to the rest of LinkedIn, right? So this is kind of like they're pushing us into this kind of community mindset. So let's migrate from community to the website. And you know, you're sitting in from a particularly like advantageous vantage point at PeerSignal, because you're collecting all this data on what's working the most for successful B2B SaaS companies, specifically as it pertains to websites. I'm curious if you can bridge that gap for me. What are some of the biggest, perhaps, areas of improvement for B2B SaaS companies that are trying to become that next unicorn, or start chipping away at the market leader?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is really just the offer, right? Do you have a compelling offer? And I think early days, the obvious choice was SEO, right? Like if you have enough how-to content around your category or around like some of the problems that you solve, then you can drive a lot of traffic there, and some of that traffic will trickle down into buyers. So that's still a way to do it. But thinking about content as the offer there, right? Or early HubSpot model was, those blogs plus like the upsells of templates and these gated pieces, basically, to essentially get into your inbox for lower cost leads. So if you think about those as offers, that's one way, right? And then you can also think about your product as the offer. Like, is your product a painkiller or is it a vitamin, right? If it's a vitamin, it's gonna be hard to survive, like, honestly, in the next few months, maybe few years here, right? So understanding like where you're at and where you might need to pivot for your offer to become a painkiller, right? And then what are those like supplementary offers? And in some cases for SaaS, that may be like new feature releases, right? Like something closer to the product. But then there's also, again, like content as product. And so I think through PeerSignal, it's like, what does our audience need? And we didn't have to get too caught up in, okay, but how does that tie back like directly to our product? Because the product like didn't exist like early days, right? And if anything, like the media company like powered like or informed like what the product should be, right? And the market informed like what the product should be. So early days, it was just like, what is missing in B2B SaaS marketing and sales, and and then just trying to deliver like the best possible like resource for that. So for us, or what we landed on were these curated databases where you can like search and filter and find jobs, and then other what we're calling galleries, I guess, that you can look for, and you can find like good examples on like how you should put together your website. So again, the reason that we knew like some of these things were the right moves was because they were the type of content that we wanted to see, like that we were looking for anyways, right? So as for instance, Adam was working on positioning and the website, it was helpful to have a homepage gallery where he can look at other not just homepages, because you can search like best homepages, right? And there's a bazillion search results, but to find like the best B2B SaaS homepages, like there's not a lot of search volume behind that. I know, because I recently looked at it. So to get that hyper specific and ignore the search volume and just follow kind of market intuition of this is what people want, we're going to make it. And then same thing with something like B2B SaaS pricing pages, right? Like there's not like a huge demand for like that specific term, but it's proved to be a cool tool for product marketers and product and marketing leaders.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there, and I'd like to explore if it's top of mind what you're seeing as far as like the perfect, well, not the perfect homepage, but like successful homepages or pricing pages. But what kind of came to mind there is just from like a content strategy for B2B SaaS companies, like they're sitting on a trove of data, right? And it's just like they can pull a narrative out of all of this data as a content offering, like you said. So best B2B SaaS homepages, you have the data there. Let's offer it up as, just a helpful resource. So I think that's a really interesting point. But I am kind of curious what you are seeing if we can dive into the Cloud 100 websites, and like you said, I think you guys recently came out with a report on homepages, pricing pages. I think there was a navigational analysis. Can we dive into the homepage at first? What are you seeing as far as homepage?
Yeah, so to set the stage, we curated around 2,000 like homepages within B2B SaaS, right? I don't want to overpromise there, so it could be 1,500 to 2,000. So our largest database is closer to 2,000.
Gotcha.
So we curated all of those, and looked for patterns. And the first thing that I think is helpful is to break it down into so kind of like user experience. So navigation, I got as one element, and CTAs, or you could say like the offer in some ways, like the CTA, and the headline, subhead, and the design. So I think like breaking those out into different elements was helpful. And what we noticed was, again, like some of the most successful businesses like within B2B SaaS are PLG. And so we noticed that within PLG, or even just within all of them, but specifically in PLG, we'd see a blend of CTAs. So we'd see them saying, get a demo and sign up for free, right? But the ones that tended to be in the Cloud 100, or that tended to be a little bit bigger and a little bit more successful, like didn't hedge. They would typically only have one CTA that was just sign up to try the product, right? So if you're thinking about like the Figmas and the Miros of the world, ClickUp, like all of those are pretty much just like sign up for free. They don't worry about like putting you in a sales cycle right away, or like confusing which thing that you should do. So that's like a trend that I saw that was interesting. Another one was the headline itself usually answers the what, sometimes like the who. So you instantly understand like what category of product this is. So Pape from CXL and Winter also came across like something of his that like added to this that I thought was interesting. Of there's the headline, but then like right above the headline, sometimes there's like some small text, and you can like use that small text to kind of like stamp your category on it, without trying to like weave it into the headline, which I thought was kind of smart. So if you're a certain type of platform, like the collaborative design tool, or sales engagement platform, or whatever it is, like you can kind of like put that label like right above the headline, and that's kind of like an easy way for people to instantly get, oh, okay, like to easily categorize you and be like, okay, like this is the type of product that I'm looking for. And then in the headline, oftentimes it'll address the unique selling proposition to some degree. So for instance, like I can't remember their exact title, but Figma's is something like, the first collaborative design tool or something like that. And so the difference is there's been SaaS design tools, like there's been these other, but like their thing in reading about their go-to-market was they were going to nail like the collaborative part of it. They were going to be like the easiest like team design kind of like software. And so emphasizing that, I think like in the H1, and then as they scaled, I think they sold for 20 billion. So as they scaled and they added new features and things and became more of a platform than a tool. So you have your like single point tools that are kind of like your smaller startups, and you should really focus on like that niche and what you do better than anyone else. And then as you scale, I did notice that like some larger companies would use dynamic text that would like switch out, like some of the text so they could just say more of like the types of things that you could do. I don't like that for most companies, right? Like most companies are too small to kind of get away with that. But if you are like a big platform, like it may be a good play at some point. So that was really like a big insight, was like, what is the right type of website and like structure and positioning for my stage of company. So really figuring out like, what is it that we do right now? Because I think another mistake that people can make early on is trying to sell the vision, right? Like eventually we're going to have this big platform and it's going to do X, Y, and Z, but your website can't promise that, right? Because the people that are coming in to buy are going to be like, hey, where's X, Y, and Z? And they're like, oh yeah, we don't have that yet, but like, that's what we're going to be. And so you really do have to sell what you have now. So be very like straightforward in the headline. And some headlines would also mention by name, like who they're talking to. So there are some that were like, hey, dev leader with like a little like emoji wave. So they'd have kind of like that precursor to the headline. There'd be other ones that would say what they do and then who they do it for within the headline. And then I think like the subhead, sorry, I'm going to take like a drink of water here.
Oh, no, you're good. I'm actually a little under the weather myself. I've been holding back a cough here.
Yeah, no, we just moved here recently and it's pretty dry in Colorado, so still getting used to it. Sorry. So subhead should describe, I think, like a little bit more of like the how and like the use cases to some degree, right? Where it's like, okay, I understand like what category of product this is. I understand like what it does. And then to get into kind of like what's unique about your company and like what specific use case I might use it for, the subhead might get into that of we do that through X, Y, and Z, or we solve X, Y, and Z use cases. Like it might just get into a little bit more of the how. And then all of those things combined, like give you enough information about the fold that you may be willing to sign up. And I think the other element is you'll always see some form of like social proof too, right? So whether that's logos, or there might be like a little case studies, like mini case studies above the fold, or like a little video. But there's always going to be like some sort of social proof above the fold. And then if you're getting someone to take action, like thinking of ways that you can reduce the friction or reduce the feeling of the ask. So maybe think little micro copy that says, no credit card required, or no payment necessary, or the sign up will take 30 seconds or whatever it is. Like any way that you can have the perception of being really easy to get started. But two other things I think were, again, some of the most, the biggest, most recognizable SaaS names and who seem to be pretty successful. They also seem to take like a little bit of a old way, new way approach of like, here's what used to be good, and like, here's how we're changing the game kind of a thing. So the first thing that comes to mind, and they actually have a different website now, but Coda used to have a website that said, enough of this sheet. And then there was this imagery of like a Google sheet behind a person who is like face palm reaction, right? So you get it instantly of like they are redefining, reimagining like the Excel or like the Google sheet, right? And so that's like a good, I think, example of old way, new way type format. There are a bunch of other creative ones too. I can try and give you the link where I kind of list out a few of them that I saw. The other one is navigation. I haven't like talked too much about, but I think another trend was, again, like especially in product-led companies, like they would tend to have product on the far left side, and then they would have what I would call like buyer enablement or like product enablement like type content like next to that. So you may have things like templates or use cases or personas, things like around the product that kind of give context into how to use the product. And then on the far right side, you almost always see the call to action button in the top right, which is, if you're a traditional B2B, it might be get a demo or talk to sales. And then for product led, it would just be, get started for free or sign up for free, something like that. So, so that was a trend I saw. And then another way that I saw what I would call this like product enablement or buyer enablement or whatever you want to call it, even for companies like Gong that are not product led, it seems like they were trying to kind of like come up with like other ways to address objections above the folds. They have like a few things above the fold that's like, like why Gong and, customer stories and, Gong use cases, right? So they have all these other things like above the folds that kind of like let you get a glimpse into the product, or at least how to use the product without actually providing you a free trial or a freemium experience.
Yeah, that seems to be pretty popular these days as far as, if you're more of like a traditionally sales-led organization or, just as from like an acquisition standpoint, using the website to help visualize the product, whether it's just like a GIF of somebody, sliding across a specific feature within the product. It sounds like you're seeing companies trending towards that, or that's probably like what the top or Cloud 100 are using as more of a tactic on their websites.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't see it as obvious like as I did on Gong, but I liked the idea of it. So it's like, if I had to guess, like I would guess that becomes like more widespread, like over the next year or so, of just like, seeing more companies who know that they can't be PLG, or it'd be very hard to be PLG, like try to leverage some of the strategies that work well in that space, right? Or try and bridge the gap between like the awareness, like, low awareness, like of a product, right? And like raving fan, like how can we sort of like bridge this like massive gap? And I think some of that like enablement, product content is helpful for that.
Something else that came to mind, especially when you were describing kind of the new way, old way, or I guess playing around with being a little clever in your messaging. I feel like it depends on your business stage, especially if you're like in category creation mode, right? Maybe it's more of a, what are you, right? Because I feel like if you're trying to be too clever when people don't really even understand like the category yet, they're not even aware of that pain point yet, it's probably going to be a little bit risky, or just you're not going to see the kind of movement or engagement.
I think that makes sense. I think early days, like you're still figuring out what the product is and like what the next few iterations of it are going to be. And so just being as clear as possible about like what's the main thing that you do, and like what's the thing that you do better, like why would I buy this product, versus like getting ahead of yourself and selling the vision, or like over promising. So what I found from looking at some of the better performing websites is that they feel too simple, but that's why they work, because you instantly get it. There's no fluff, like it's just, this is what we do, right? And I think there's like some product strategy involved in that. It's like you have to be solving the right types of problems, right? Like solving those painkiller types of problems. But like early stage, it's just not overcomplicating it, not trying to get visionary, maybe not even trying to create a category like just yet. Like that's rarely like the best answer, or like the best thing for an early stage like company to do. But really just being like, here's where we've already found traction in the market. This is like the pain point. This is the reason that people are buying us right now, right? And then like, listening to the market, iterating on that, seeing if there is like a new kind of like category that you can put yourself into. But first just saying like, going back to the drawing board, or going back to those sales calls of like, what was the reason that these people converted, that these early customers like became customers, right? And like that's your headline.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're also collecting data on hiring trends, right?
Yeah, so the latest data from our analysis on the Cloud 100 was that the top role, like, or at least like the top GTM role, so sales or marketing role, that B2B SaaS companies are hiring is still AEs and AMs. So account managers being usually the person like in charge of upsells and retention. And then the next most popular was CS. So that all made sense, I think, like given the times of like people prioritizing keeping what they have, like retaining their existing customers. So the combination of AMs and CS, customer success, the companies are sort of like prioritizing this. And this is both across our B2B SaaS index. So everyone from 5-person companies to 5,000 person companies, and Cloud 100s, which on average are about like 1,500 people, or, you know, there's obviously a lot that are bigger than that too. So all of those, like that held true. It was significant difference between like Cloud 100s are investing even more in those, but it makes sense because they also tend to be bigger, right? So so those were the top, and then BDRs, SDRs were third, and then after that it was mostly marketing roles, with ops kind of being near the bottom. So like marketing ops and rev ops like being near the bottom of like those priorities. So it's like, again, like one, it depends on stage, right? Like if that's like what you should do. But yeah, essentially like you're still seeing the same types of trends of like, you know, sales is still being prioritized, but now you're seeing, you know, CS like surge a little bit like right now. And then with marketing, like the top priorities like within marketing seem to be growth, demand gen, which in some cases are interchangeable. Growth is kind of interesting because I associate that a little bit more with PLG, right? With like product centric type companies. And demand gen, I associate a little bit more with like traditional, although both companies can have both. And then it was like community and brand and comms kind of a thing. And then you're seeing like the ops. So I think like the insights here were just retention, how important like paying attention to your customer is, making sure they're successful, all of that. Yeah, within marketing specifically, and within the Cloud 100, I think it was like 36 of the 100 were actively hiring for community people, which I thought was interesting. So that's a good like third of the top SaaS companies that are actively hiring for community. So, and a lot of those like already have communities. So it'd be interesting to see if they are now putting full-time people behind it, but they started their community early, or if some of them are now just starting to create their community. But the investments like in community and the difference between Cloud 100s that are doing that and everyone else, like the delta there is pretty significant as well. That's what jumped out at me, is like companies that have proven themselves a little bit already, like think this is a good idea. So maybe it is. I'm obviously pretty bullish on it, given that that's part of my title. So I could be a little bit skewed here, but yeah, that definitely jumped out at me as a trend, especially with seeing like even some of the more recent layoffs. Like I noticed, you know, a couple companies like I really admired, like laid off a few sales folks and marketing folks, but both of them kept their community. They kept like their community roles. So I thought that was interesting as well.
That is really interesting. I'll be honest, I find it kind of surprised. I think I find it surprising that operations, I think you mentioned RevOps is kind of lower on the list as far as prioritizations. I think there's a larger conversation that's being had today about how important RevOps is. And I came across a title a couple of weeks ago about how specifically in B2B SaaS, like CMOs are starting to be replaced by CROs. And I think it was more so like a clickbaity thing, but I think there's some, you know, there's a reality to that. There's a reason why that article exists. and kind of in line with what you were just saying as far as layouts. I think we might start to see that climb the list a little bit as companies become more efficient and realize the importance of RevOps. And I think it's kind of trendy to quote Chris Walker or mention Chris Walker in his work, but he's obviously doing a lot of work around like revenue R&D and how important that is. And I think that just kind of plays a piece in that conversation. This is kind of I don't know, this may be a difficult question, but everything that we've talked about now, just up until this point about the Cloud 100 and all the best practices that they're doing with their website, homepage, pricing page, navigation, what have you, they're there for a reason, right? They're at the top for a reason. I think setting aside first to market, because there's a huge advantage there. What differentiates them from everybody else from like a process or mentality standpoint? Is it more like customer centrism? Is it experimentation? They have they've bought into experimentation and iterative improvement. Is it speed? Is it all the above? I'm curious what you think there.
I think at the heart, it is putting the customer first, right? So it's like letting them experience and interact with your brand the way that they want, and eventually buy the way that they want, right? So I think that is still at the heart of it. And then I think it's a great strategy and positioning as well. So I think like the biggest killer of startups is like lack of focus and clarity, right? So it starts at the product level of like, what are we building and for who? And then it's like the, quarter to quarter, month to month of like being able to iterate fast, like read the market, iterate fast, and then translate that into a message to communicate that well enough to sell the product, right? To grow. And so I think, it starts with the customer, like, and that goes to how customers want to buy, but also like having feedback loops, having a good way to track your market, research your market, talking with customers, all of that kind of like plays into one thing. So the companies I think that are the most successful bridge all of those things, right? Like the customer insights, the market insights go into or reach the product org so that the product can like make something that the market actually wants, right? Like that's the very foundation. But then it goes same thing for content, right? Like those insights reach content team can create the type of content that they want. They can also share that with the demand gen team and the product team, like where there's just like this open communication, like growth loop, where it's like you have this growth loop and it's feeding the entire business, right? Like that's where you get what we call like high leverage activities that don't just support one department, like they support like the whole business. So being able to kind of identify like those big rock activities that are going to make or break your business, and then having a culture of action, right, where you can like feel comfortable experimenting and failing, right, and like building in public, right, like all of those things, like this like culture of experimentation and like visibility, I guess is what it comes down to, both in like you're sharing on social media, you're putting things out there, you're trying things, and then also the rest of your team knows what they're doing or knows what you're doing, knows why you're doing it, and they can use that in their departments as well.
Beautifully said. So the last area that I'd like to explore with you before we close out here is content operations. And you cover this topic at length in your own podcast, Content Logistics. And, I encourage anybody who's listening to check it out. A lot of good stuff. But, whether you're sales-led, product-led, marketing-led, community-led organization, there's always going to be this increasing need as you grow to produce, iterate, repurpose content. And, we see a lot of B2B SaaS marketing teams relying on their engineering, their product engineers to help with the marketing website. So that's obviously, an inefficient process. I'm curious, like, what else are you seeing, and why do B2B SaaS companies in general have problems scaling their content operations?
Yeah, I think part of it is they're wanting to scale just to scale versus like scaling because they know scaling is going to get them a specific outcome, if that makes sense. So I think if you haven't done SEO at scale, if that's not your kind of like bread and butter, then that might not be, you either need to bring in an expert to do that, or like reevaluate why you're doing it, right? Like, do we need to publish like 5 pieces a week and like figure out how to do that effectively? If yes, like then great. But it may be that you need to bring on like the right content person that's done that before and that has that system to be able to put in place, or as the leader yourself, whether it's at the CEO level or VP of content type of level. Like, it's really helpful if like you spend the time to create the process so that it scales easily, if that makes sense. You're forced to kind of create the system before you bring on new people. So then you're handing over a system, like a program, rather than just like handing over like bits and pieces of an experiment, right? So I think taking the time to like kind of like figure out something that works, and then once it works, figuring out how to scale it. I think it goes back to like too many companies try to scale something before they know it works. And because they don't have the confidence, whether it's like the numbers to back it, they don't want to spend too much of their time like on the setup work. Because then they're like, oh, okay, I spent like a week or so like putting this process in place, and I don't know if this is the right thing. You know what I mean? I don't know if this is like the right
seems
play.
right.
Or, yeah, they're like, this seems right. I like it in theory, right? But like not enough to like focus like my whole content strategy around it. So I think it comes down to like lack of confidence, because it hasn't been proven, right? And at that point, you should be a little bit more scrappy, in my opinion. Like, you shouldn't have every last detail worked out until you have like recurring signals of like essentially the market saying like, yes, like more of this, you know what I mean? Like, once you have those growth signals, then it's like, okay, like now let's invest more resources and like outsourcing the production work on this podcast, right? Figuring out like the foldering, for this thing. Like, you scale like as you go. And then I think it's, setting aside the time in some cases to be like, okay, we believe in this thing. We know it's going to work. We have buy-in. We're going to take a couple days, a week, whatever it is to like build it out. Right. But I think it's really hard to do that because oftentimes you're asked to prove the channel.
Makes sense. Are you ready for a couple of rapid fire questions?
Yes, let's do it.
I think I know what you're going to say to this, but what's one thing you wish more B2B SaaS marketers would do more of?
I think that I'll go focus. Like, I don't know if that's what you're thinking, but yeah, I think just getting really good at one piece of content or one channel first.
Gotcha. Okay. So no, I thought it was going to be more community oriented. So it actually sounds like more companies are understanding and jumping onto this community led idea. They're starting to get it. I
think so. I'm hopeful.
Are there any upcoming events either you or PeerSignal are taking part in?
We are focused primarily still on the research to start with. So getting those big pieces out before we scale too far into like the events part. But we're going to be like guesting on a few more podcasts. So recently booked some of those.
Awesome. And what are other resources, publications, experts that you think are good for B2B SaaS marketers to be checking out?
Yeah, lately I've been liking Demand Curve. They have a good newsletter. Winter, I think, has some like actionable website conversion content. Yeah, and then just shameless plug for PeerSignal for all go-to-market examples and data.
There it is. And last question, what's the best way for listeners to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can find me at LinkedIn, just Camille Trent. Yeah, just shoot me a DM if you have any questions about this episode or planning for the next year. And yeah, wishing all B2B SaaS marketers the best during this
interesting
holiday,
time.
but interesting, yeah, unprecedented time.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Camille. This has been great.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.